what is a sin nature? Is that what's at the center of me, is sin? All right, let's do some theology here. Let's take a little journey together. In Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. And in verse 27, it says that he created man in his image. Look what it says. It says in verse 27, God created human beings in his own image, and in the image of God, he created them male and female. And then in verse 31, it says, then God looked over all he had, and he said, it was very good. All right, in chapter 3, in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve sin, and sin enters the world. So the question is, did God create people with a sin nature? If you're sort of into theology, you do a little study on theology, you'll find people have differences of opinion on this. Eastern Orthodox theology would start with Genesis 1 and talk about original goodness. They would say, well, God didn't make people bad, because how could God make you bad if you're made in his image? Made in the image of God, and God is pure and holy and perfect and righteous. Why would he make something in his image that's not righteous? And then how could he judge sin? Because if he programmed you to sin, and then you sin and he destroys you for what you did. It's like you make something, it does exactly what you designed it to do, and then destroy it for doing what you designed. It's like, that's kind of weird. Why would you do that? So in the Eastern Orthodox theology starts with original goodness. Western evangelical traditional theology kind of moves from there to Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve sin, and they say through Adam sin entered the world. And of course we jump into the New Testament in Romans chapter 5 that describes this. Paul says, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world, and Adam's sin brought death. So death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. So regardless of how you slice it up theologically, here's the bottom line. We all have flesh. Human beings have flesh and free will. In the combination of flesh and free will, your flesh is prone to deception. Your flesh is prone to weakness. Your flesh is prone to temptation. You have a free will on top of that, which means it's only a matter of time throughout this journey that you start to add these experiences to your life. You're born into this. There's a process of ramping up and development in your brain. By the time your brain starts to even be able to sort things out, you've already had life experiences. People have already treated you a certain kind of way. You already came up in a certain kind of family. And so you got to try to detangle what I've been through in my life, what I've been told, what I've been taught, what I've been indirectly taught. What do I believe about all this? As my brain is developing, we end up with all of this stuff in our mantle. Let's think of it like this. Your crust is what's on the outside. It's your conduct. It's your conduct or your actions. Your mantle is your conscience and your attitude. So this is, again, how I think about, how I feel about my mind, will, and emotions as it relates to my life. My core is my character or my nature, who I really am at the center of myself. And so within the Bible, we learn that people were trying to sort this out because sin entered the world through Adam. So now people are going, but we want to be righteous as God is righteous. So they did what's logical. How would you solve the problem? You go, all right, if we want to be righteous, we have to define righteousness. So they went through a process and asked God to help us define righteousness. And they came up with 613 divine laws of righteousness. If you do these 613 things, this is what righteousness looks like. And then in Deuteronomy 6, they said, okay, here's how you do it. Deuteronomy 6:25, here's how you attain righteousness. If we are careful to obey all this law, these 613 laws before the Lord our God, as he commanded us, that will be our righteousness. Deuteronomy 6:25. Perfectly defined righteousness. Keep it in your willpower. Basically, manipulate your crust to do the right stuff out here. But here's the problem. Every human being has flesh. Every human being has a backstory, walks through life, has relational baggage, has things happen to them, has all of this that creates mantle in here, that creates tectonic plates and earthquakes and all of this. So no one can get the crust right on their own. They were trying to get core righteousness through keeping the laws. Deuteronomy 6:25. So predictably, generation after generation after generation, it was this failure. And what happens when you try to do that? Well, kind of one of two things. Either you realize that you're not able to do it. Eventually, you're going to realize you can't do it, so you try a couple things. One is you decide to try to win the righteousness award, basically, compared to everybody else, which leads to self-righteousness, essentially. I'm going to get it better than everybody. I can't get 613 laws right, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, year after year, decade over decade. That's not going to happen. So I'm just going to try to be better than you. I'm going to try to be better than you, and if I can be better than all of you, then I get the award. I get the award of righteousness. Most folks are honest enough to go, that's a losing game, and they just quit trying. That's your Old Testament. Jesus shows up in the middle of this, and he's getting ready to usher in a new way of righteousness. But he starts with saying something peculiar. He shows up in Matthew 5, and in Matthew 5, he says, hey, I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law, in other words, the ones who were winning the awards for most self-righteous, he said, unless your righteousness is better than theirs, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Essentially, he puts the bar to the edge of the human capacity, and then he says, hey, unless it's higher than that, you cannot attain righteousness. To which they went, well, we are now effectively demoralized. To which Jesus said, now you're ready to learn. I'm not here to destroy your morale. I'm here to destroy your paradigm. And if you've come to the place where you realize this isn't going to work this way, I can't purify my core from the crust in. Now, when I set the bar so high, it crushed your spirit. I want to crush your paradigm so I can introduce a new way. Because here's what Jesus was about to do and about to teach them and about to do for them is this. Righteousness is not an award, it's a gift. But in order for him to help them understand the gift of righteousness, he had to set the bar to an unattainable level. Otherwise, they would keep trying to do the righteousness as an award. So he puts it that far high. Now, here's what the Apostle Paul says here back in Romans 5. He says, hey, from the sin of one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many. But even greater, look at this, is God's wonderful grace and his, check it out, gift of righteousness. His gift of righteousness. For all who received it will live in triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ. Yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation to everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. Sin nature, however you want to slice it theologically, we all were in that boat. But he said now, but because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous. Righteous, it's a gift, it's not an award, it's a gift. And there's a huge difference. An award is something I earned. I earned an award. That's why every award show you've ever seen, they accept an award, and all of the humility is false humility. Oh, I just want to thank God, and I want to thank all these people that helped me get. That's a bunch of garbage. They get I'm so humbled by this. Oh, give me a break. You're not humbled by this. You just walked out. You're not humbled by this. The only person in the history of awards to ever accept an award with any sincerity at all was Snoop Doggy Dogg when he accepted the award on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's on the internet. It's on the way he accepted it. The man stood up. The one guy, think what you want about Snoop Doggy Dogg, Calvin Brodus, you don't know him like that. I'm just telling you, this guy actually accepted it with at least sincerity, at least honesty. Here's what he did. He stood up on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He said, I'd like to thank me. He's like, I'd like to thank myself for all the work I've done, for the times I got my own self up out of bed, for the times that I came. He just went on and go, for all the hard work and the dedication and the tenacity and for not listening to the haters and for continuing to go when people told me to go. He goes, I'd just like to thank myself. I was like, hey, Calvin, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate, because that's an award, you earned it. A gift is different. I didn't earn a gift. I didn't earn a gift. Self-righteousness is the belief that I could do enough on my crust to have the best crust. It's a crust competition. And we all know who has the best crust. It's Papa John's. Everyone knows that. It's not even debatable. But to try to get the crust right, that's what we try to do, is it's a crust competition. And Jesus said, no, it's not an award. It's a gift. It's a gift. Righteousness is a gift through Jesus. Look what it says in Romans 10:4. It says, for Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. All right, get this. Why was the law given? What was the purpose? To define righteousness. To define it. He said, Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. As a result, all who believe him in him are made right with God, are made righteous. 2 Corinthians 5:17 and 18 said this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. Okay, this is, again, what's behind the language of being born again. What is behind that language? It's essentially going, you're born with new DNA, with a new epicenter, with a new core, without a sin nature. You have righteousness at your core. It says anyone who belongs to Christ is a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. And all of this, look at this, verse 18, don't miss this. All of this is a gift from God. It's a gift, not an award. It's a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made, look at this, him who had no sin to be sin for us so that we might become the righteousness. We might become the righteousness of God. Well, what does this have to do with anything? Why are we talking about righteousness? This has everything to do with everything. Because what the enemy will do in your life is discourage you and condemn you. Because even though I've given my life to Jesus, and even though the reality is that the gift of righteousness is at the core of who you are, it's not a sin nature. You have righteousness as your core. Something comes out of my mantle that I'm still working on. I'm still trying to figure out. I still want to do something. We're back to Romans 7, and I thank God for the honesty of Paul, who said, man, there's a war going on inside of me, and something keeps coming out, and I want to do the right thing, but sometimes I don't even want to do the right thing, and something bubbles out, and the enemy condemns and says, see, look at you. At your core, you're still disgusting. At your core, you're still gross. At your core, you're still broken. At your core, you're still sinful. You got this sin nature. The nature of you. If we peel back all the layers of you, it's dirty, it's bad, and that's a lie from the pit of hell. This is why Paul in Romans 7 goes through this whole convoluted journey of the thing I want to do, I don't do, and the thing I don't want to do, I do. And then he calls himself a wretched man, a tortured man. What's wrong with me? Who will free me from this? What is the answer for this? And he said, thank God for Jesus. And he says, and then if you're not careful, you would think that Romans ends at Romans 7. But it doesn't end at Romans 7. There's more chapters. It ends, Romans 7 ends right there. But he says, after all of this, like, why are things coming out of me that aren't good if I'm supposed to be good at my core? And he flip it to Romans 8, and the first verse of Romans 8 is, so there is therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. There is no condemnation. Why would Paul say that? Because he knows what we know, which is this: when you're in this crazy life and something's coming out from inside you, you wonder where it's coming from, and the enemy will use the ugly thing that came to the surface, the outburst that came out, the thing that came out of your mouth. And he'll go, if you were really a Christian, if you really had the Spirit inside you, you wouldn't do it. This just proves it's all hocus pocus, and you're living a fairy tale, and this is all a bunch, and you are still tainted, and you'll see yourself as dirty. So God's righteousness doesn't attract me because I just think of his righteousness compared to my dirty, nasty sin nature. And I don't understand that actually righteousness is a gift given to you and given to me through the blood of Jesus, through the work of Jesus that has now declared me righteous, that God made he who had no sin to do this, to give me the gift so that I might become the righteousness of God. It's what's at the center. This is a massive understanding because it will affect how you see yourself. The condemnation that the enemy tries to heap on you, he does successfully all of the time. And the evidence that he uses to accuse you with is something that came out of your mantle. So he lies to you about your core because of something that came out of your mantle. Your mind, will, and emotions are still a work in progress. You're still digging through things from your past. You're still working through, why do I even want to do that? You're still working through that. But if you don't see this and understand this for what it is, you'll lack the courage to even get in there and dig around because you think, I don't want to know what I'm going to find. What I'm going to find is at the core is something broken and ugly and disgusting. All right, so I preached this sermon to my wife this week before I brought it to y'all. And I was like, hey, this is the word God's given me in this. And my wife is the scientist in the family. Okay, we did a series earlier this year, Fingerprints. She kind of started the whole thing on like, hey, here's a scientific thing. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of like the Bible. And so I tell her about the Bible and she tells me about science. And it's a really fun journey. And so I'm telling her about this and the core and the earth and all this. And she's like, oh, I got one for you. You got to share it with the folks. So I'm just being obedient, okay, to my wife. This is what she said. She said, think about this. When the core pushes through the mantle to the crust, there's a volcano. And it erupts, right? And that kind of looks like a tree, but it's supposed to be a volcano with lava. And she said, this is the thing. She goes, I was just watching a documentary about sharks. And they were talking about these volcanoes that are in the ocean. So go ahead and bring up this picture. She says, okay, so there's these volcanoes in the ocean and they erupt. So what's from the core has pushed to the crust and is erupting in the ocean. And of course you see all this lava. And when we think of volcanoes, we think of destruction. Mount St. Helens, boom, here comes this lava and it destroys all these man-made structures. But she said what's actually happening with the volcano in both the ocean and the land is it's introducing nutrients back in the ecosystem. So what they found is actually, you can check me on this, it's on Google, it can't be wrong. If it comes out, listen, these volcanoes erupt in the ocean, and when they do so, they introduce micronutrients into the ocean that attracts plankton, that attracts sharks, that sets the whole ecosystem in motion. Am I right or am I right? Okay, the science teacher verified what I just said. That is true. We think of fire, we tend to think of the lake of fire. We think of fire. The Bible uses the fire oftentimes as a refining, as burning things away. God is pushing through your mantle from the core of you, righteousness to the surface. Don't be afraid of it. You got to understand what's at your core. What's at your core is good. What's at your core is true. You got to get this understanding deep in your spirit. I end with this. I've told y'all, many of you know, both of my sons are on the autism spectrum. I always try to be careful not to overshare about this, but God's just used it so powerfully and is always making things come alive for me. So I just want to share it with you. So pardon me if I'm doing it too much, but this is one that just hit me with this. When my sons were first diagnosed, I was making a mistake on accident. I didn't realize it, but I was referring to them as autistic. So I said, yeah, my sons are autistic. My sons are autistic. And someone corrected me who's in the field, and they said, well, hold on a second. Your sons are not autistic. Your sons have autism. I'm like, what? They're like, no, you got to understand. There's a big difference. If you say they're autistic or you think they're autistic, you've branded them as at their core, they're autistic. But they say, what you got to understand about autism is your sons in their brains have everything they need. They have everything, but autism is kind of in the way. They bear the burden of autism, so to speak. And they said, well, we got work throughout life. We're going to work to try to take the keys. Like they got all the rooms in their brain that you and I do, but we're going to work through life. We're going to try to find the right key. We're going to keep trying keys and doors to open, and then they'll do it. So they actually said, don't think of them as autistic. Don't put that on them. Think of them as they have autism, but at their core, they have everything they need. I was like, oh, that's good. And they're like, okay, hey, let's try this. They said, maybe one of the keys we can try with your son, because my son wasn't talking or wanting to talk, wasn't interested in talking. And they said, sometimes the key is if you get him doing something physical, it'll unlock the verbal. I was like, all right, what are we gonna do? So my wife buys a trampoline. When you're a kid, trampolines don't wear you out. Did anybody have a trampoline when they were a kid and they were just like, do you remember just jumping for hours, and then you just went and you were fine? I don't know what it is. When you're a grown up, you jump on a trampoline, at 30 seconds, you're like, hey, we're gonna play a game. I'm gonna lay down and you all popcorn me. It caught me off guard. I didn't realize how tired I was gonna get. But we go out, I come home, my wife's got this trampoline, my son jumping on the trampoline, I go out, I'm jumping with him on the trampoline. And my son, who didn't try to talk, didn't want to talk, wasn't interested in talking, we're jumping on the trampoline, he starts saying his ABCs, he starts telling me about his day, he starts saying things back to me, and I say, hey, give me a 5-minute break and then we'll resume, all right? And I come back, and I'm jumping on this trampoline, it's going, there's a door there, it's being unlocked, he's not autistic, he has autism. Now, with you, what do you believe is at the core of you? I'm an anxious person. No, you're not. You have anxiety. You have anxiety. At the core of you, you're working through anxiety. You're fighting through them. At the core of you is righteous. At the core of you is whole. At the core of you is holy. By the way, you don't have righteousness. You are righteous. That's what's at your core. If we strip back every single layer of you, if we get all the way through the mantle to the core of you, what's at the core of you is righteous.